Picture this. You're standing barefoot on cold tile, arms raised inside a humming machine, while a stranger in a blue uniform studies your silhouette on a glowing screen. You've done everything right. Liquids in a clear bag, laptop in its own bin, belt coiled next to your shoes. You followed every rule, answered every question, smiled when you didn't feel like smiling, and yet something feels off. The agent's eyes linger a second too long. A subtle nod passes between two officers you weren't supposed to notice. Then a gloved hand rises and a single word changes the next hour of your life. Secondary. You don't know what you did wrong, you don't know what they saw, but here's the part most people never realize. The system that just flagged you isn't designed the way you think it is. And the secrets buried inside airport security checkpoints would make most travelers rethink everything they believe about the blue gloves, the body scanners, and the silent authority figures who decide whether you make your flight or miss it entirely. Every year, over 900 million passengers move through American airports. 900 million people removing shoes, surrendering water bottles, and stepping through machines they don't understand. Most assume the process is airtight, scientific, foolproof. After all, this is national security. Billions of dollars in equipment, thousands of trained officers, the full weight of the Department of Homeland Security standing between you and the gate. But in 2015, something happened that shattered that illusion, and almost nobody outside the agency knows the full story. The Department of Homeland Security ran an internal investigation. Undercover agents, people who looked just like you and me, attempted to smuggle fake explosives and prohibited weapons through some of the busiest checkpoints in America. They weren't amateurs. They knew exactly what TSA was looking for, and they wanted to see if the system could catch them. The results were classified. Then they leaked. 67 out of 70 attempts succeeded. 95% of the fake threats made it through undetected. Success. In one test, an undercover agent strapped a simulated explosive device to his back, walked through screening, set off the metal detector, received a pat-down, and still wasn't caught. The device remained hidden. The agent boarded, and somewhere in a government office, someone had to explain how a multi-billion-dollar security apparatus failed at the one thing it was built to do. The TSA called it a wake-up call. They promised reforms, new protocols, better training, but here's what they didn't publicize. The machines you walk through every single time you fly, they haven't fundamentally changed. Machines. The officers watching those screens, many of them never read the full standard operating procedure, a document several hundred pages long. They're relying on word of mouth, abbreviated training, and pattern recognition that gets duller with every passing hour. Procedure. And the most sophisticated threats aren't caught by technology. They're caught by people. People who get tired, people who get distracted, people who have seen 10,000 bags and start to assume the next one is just like the last. Here's the insider truth about what happens the moment you hand over your boarding pass. You think the agent is just checking your name against your ID, matching faces, confirming you're allowed to fly. But there's a second layer most passengers never see. That boarding pass gets marked. A small notation, initials, a badge number, sometimes a code written in ink so subtle you'd never notice unless you knew to look. If the agent at the podium finds something off about you, that mark tells every officer downstream to watch you more closely. Maybe your ID had a minor discrepancy, maybe you hesitated when answering a question, maybe you just looked nervous. It doesn't matter, the flag is set. And here's where it gets interesting. The agent who marks your pass isn't acting on intuition alone. They are trained in behavioral detection. That friendly small talk at the podium, the casual question about where you're headed, it might not be friendliness at all. It's an interrogation technique. They are watching your eyes, tracking where you look, noting if you glance around nervously or stare at the floor. A seasoned traveler meets their gaze, answers calmly, and moves on. A nervous flyer does the same things a person with something to hide might do, and the system doesn't always know the difference. One former TSA officer put it bluntly, "The first thing we look at isn't your appearance. It's where your eyes go. If you're scanning the room, looking over your shoulder, avoiding contact, you're already on the radar, even if the only thing you're guilty of is being afraid of flying. But let's say you make it past the podium without a mark on your pass. You are in the line now, watching bins slide into the X-ray machine, waiting your turn to step into the body scanner. You assume the technology is doing the heavy lifting, that somewhere behind that screen, an officer is analyzing your outline with surgical precision, catching anything suspicious down to the millimeter. This is where the illusion gets dangerous. That X-ray machine scanning your carry-on has a dirty secret. It cannot tell the difference between certain everyday items and actual explosives. A block of cheese, cheddar, Gouda, does not matter, shows up on the screen identically to C4. Same color, same density, same amorphous shape. Organic materials all register as orange on the display. And to an officer who has been staring at that screen for hours, a wheel of brie looks exactly like something that could bring down an aircraft. Meats do the same thing. Certain dense pastries, protein bars, if you have ever been pulled aside for additional screening and could not figure out why, there is a decent chance your snacks triggered an alert that protocol required them to investigate. The machine flagged you, not because you did anything wrong, but because the technology has limits nobody talks about. And here's another secret most passengers never learn. That body scanner you step into, it does not just activate when the officer thinks you look suspicious. In many checkpoints, the system is programmed to flag every 10th passenger automatically. It does not matter if you are a grandmother from Wisconsin or a businessman who flies weekly. If you are number 10, you are getting additional screening. It is not random in the way you think. It is mathematical. A built-in feature designed to create unpredictability. The officer did not choose you. An algorithm did. This is where it gets ugly for anyone who opts out of the scanner. Maybe you do not like the idea of millimeter wave imaging. Maybe you have read concerns about radiation, even though the CDC says the levels are 1,000 times lower than your cell phone. It does not matter. The moment you say those two words, I opt out, you become what insiders call a tulip. That is the actual code name. Tulips. And officers hate them. Not because they're suspicious, because they slow everything down. Opting out requires a full pat-down, a private room if you request it, and paperwork that gums up the line. One former officer admitted that when someone opts out of the newer millimeter wave machines, colleagues get annoyed because they assume the passenger does not even understand what they are refusing. You are not making a safety choice in their eyes. You are making their shift harder, and while they are required to treat you professionally, that frustration is real, and it colors the interaction whether anyone admits it or not. Meanwhile, the seasoned traveler knows something most do not. If you have a medical device, a pacemaker, or certain implants, you have every right to opt out without judgment. And if you simply prefer a pat-down for personal reasons, that is your prerogative under federal guidelines. But walking in with that knowledge, calmly stating your preference, cooperating fully, treating the process as routine, changes everything. You are not a problem. You are someone who knows the rules. Now let's talk about what happens when things go wrong. Not for the system, for you. You're standing in the checkpoint and an officer pulls your bag for additional inspection. Maybe it's the cheese, maybe it's a tightly packed section of clothing that looked dense on the screen. Maybe it's nothing at all, just a random audit. But as you watch them unzip your carry-on and start removing items, you feel the panic rising. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, you're wondering if you packed something you shouldn't have. A forgotten pocket knife, a bottle of liquid you didn't realize was oversized, a souvenir from your last trip that suddenly seems more threatening under fluorescent lights. Here's the insider truth that could save you more stress than you realize. TSA's primary mission isn't what you think. They're not hunting for drugs. They're not searching for contraband. They're looking for threats to aircraft security, weapons, explosives, items that could compromise a flight. If they happen to find something illegal during that search, they'll call law enforcement. But they're not the DEA. They're not customs. They're a security agency with a specific mandate. And that mandate doesn't include tearing apart your luggage looking for your personal choices. That doesn't mean you should test the boundaries, but it does mean the agent going through your bag isn't thinking about what you do in your private life. They're thinking about whether anything in that bag could hurt 300 people at 30,000 feet. And if you're still nervous, if the whole process makes you want to turn around and leave, here's something almost nobody knows. You can. TSA operates on consent, expressed or implied. If you decide halfway through screening that you'd rather not fly today, you have the legal right to collect your belongings and walk back out of the airport. Agents might try to delay you. They might ask questions. They might hold you while they call a supervisor, but you are not under arrest. You haven't committed a crime by changing your mind. And unless they have specific articulable suspicion that you pose an active threat, they cannot detain you indefinitely. The nervous traveler panics, assumes they're trapped, and submits to whatever comes next. The informed traveler knows the rules and knows that knowledge itself is a form of protection. But here's the twist that makes all of this more absurd than it already sees. Despite the gravity, the protocols, the billions in funding, TSA checkpoints have a comedic underbelly that rarely makes the news. Former officer Jason Harrington spent 6 years at O'Hare, one of the busiest airports in America. And according to him, the single biggest operational nightmare wasn't terrorism, it was cats. Cats escaping from carriers during screening. Cats that scratch, claw, and refuse to come when called. Cats that bolt into the terminal and disappear under seats while their owners scream and officers scramble. Here's why that matters more than you'd think. An animal that escapes before being screened is technically a security breach. It hasn't been patted down, it hasn't been cleared, and under strict protocol, a supervisor could use that as justification to shut down an entire terminal until the animal is recovered and processed. One loose tabby could delay 1,000 passengers. It's absurd. It's real. And it's a reminder that the system designed to protect you is also a system run by human beings dealing with situations no training manual could fully anticipate. So what does all of this mean for you? The person standing in line next week, shoes in hand, wondering if today will be smooth or chaotic. It means the system isn't magic. It isn't infallible. It's a collection of machines with limitations, protocols with gaps, and people with varying levels of training, patience, and attention. The nervous traveler walks in blind, reacts to every delay with fear, and leaves feeling violated by a process they never understood. The seasoned traveler walks in knowing exactly what's happening and why. They know their boarding pass might be marked. They know the scanner flags every 10th person regardless of behavior. They know organic materials look like explosives on X-ray, that opting out makes them a tulip, and that the friendly agent might be running a behavioral assessment disguised as small talk. They don't panic. They don't bristle. They move through the checkpoint like someone who belongs there. Because knowledge transforms you from a subject of the system into someone who understands it. And that understanding changes everything. The way you pack, the way you dress, the way you answer questions, and meet the eyes of the officer checking your ID. You're not hiding anything. You're not afraid. You're simply informed. And in a system built on uncertainty and psychological pressure, being informed is the closest thing to immunity you'll ever get. Next time you're standing barefoot on that cold tile, arms raised, waiting for the scanner to clear you, remember this. The machine doesn't know who you are. The officer doesn't know your story. The algorithm selecting every 10th passenger doesn't care about your intentions. But you know the secrets they don't advertise, you know the gaps they don't acknowledge, and you know that the real power in any security checkpoint isn't held by the person in the uniform. It's held by the person who understands exactly what's happening and refuses to be intimidated by a system designed to make everyone feel like a suspect. Fly informed. Fly calm. And remember, they're watching. But now, so are you.